some of them that got out seem to have evolved into a super race of parakeets.
You are listening to Urban Wildlife Podcast.
Tell me what I just did. Maybe we'll start off this way.
Yeah, we were looking at a picture of a bee on the cover of my guide to the bees in your
That's
backyard.
an Urban Wildlife publication. We both own a copy. We should be...
by Joseph S. Wilson and Olivia Messenger Carroll.
Yeah.
And this has been helping me open my eyes to bees. I'm trying to ID more of them. I'll tell a quick funny anecdote related to this book. And they tell you in this book that you can capture and then refrigerate a bee, and then it will remain sort of like asleep or like in torpor or whatever for long enough to like get a good look at it and spend a few minutes trying to identify it and stuff. So I went in the backyard and I nabbed some medium sized, like honeybee sized, mostly black bee.
Carpenter bee?
Maybe. I don't know yet. And so this is what happened. I put it in the refrigerator. Then after like a couple hours, it's like curled up in the bottom of the jar. Looks like it's dead. And so I'm looking back here at my little digital plug-in USB dissecting microscope. And so I plugged that in, got Magnolia here, Gigi here, got this bee. I put it in the little tray to look at. And within like 30 seconds, the thing starts waking up. And so I'm sitting here with like Magnolia, who's like 4, and she's getting so psyched about the bee. And I'm like, wait, but it's moving. I don't want this like pissed off bee stuck in our dining room. And so like I start like trying to take a look at it to snap a few pictures, and then like it falls on the floor, and I get it off the floor, and finally we let it go in the backyard. And so I'm still trying to figure out what it is because I didn't take pictures of the right. I was sort of in a rush, and I didn't get the right characters photographed to be able to or features photographed to try to tell what it is.
But I was just pointing to the joint between two of the segments on the bee's legs, and I was saying that that's what Matt is.
This is true.
Which is the bee's knees.
So, Mr. Bee's knees. Well, actually, you just start with us. So, this is one of your regular co-hosts, Billy Brown, with
Tony Crosdale,
and our guest host,
Matt Halley.
All right, and besides,
who we realized hadn't had him on the podcast as much as we thought we did until I actually asked Matt, and he's like, "No, I think you only had me on once," and I don't know why Matt should be like, multiple season kind of guest.
Well, that
I think he's going to be regular. Yeah. Not least of all because he lives with you and he's easy to wrangle,
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Well,
he's also actually a professional biologist.
Yeah, he's a PhD candidate, and he also is a very good speaker.
Yes. So,
and the bee's knees, apparently.
And the bee's knees. So, where do you work?
I work at the Academy of Natural Sciences at Drexel University, and I'm working on a PhD at Drexel in the Department of Biodiversity, Earth, and Environmental Science. I study thrushes, family Turdidae, and especially, I know, I just like to say that, every time I say that, the 12-year-old boy in me goes, and I study a genus called Catharis, which are the spotted, among the migratory species, they tend to be spotted forest-dwelling thrushes, but there are a whole bunch of neotropical resident species that don't have spots, and some of them act a little funny. Okay. So I'm working on systematics and phylogeography and evolution of that group.
Great. But before we get too far, I know that one of our interviewees, looking at you, Krishna, is probably going to be listening to this, and I want Matt to describe what shirt he's wearing.
So I'm wearing a Sahara India shirt. So I traveled to Bangalore, Bengaluru, and wow, what an incredible experience. I was in Karnataka in Madikeri for about 4 or 5 months, spent about 2 weeks staying with friends in Bangalore, and got to bird in Bangalore and explore the botanical gardens there, and also out in Mysore, which is just to the west of Bangalore, where there's the incredible Mysore Palace. and also some incredible Hindu temple complexes. And you've got just incredible wildlife where you've got macaques at the temple complex and like our guest said, black kites and Brahminy kites all over the place. And what a spectacular place.
There you go. So before we forget, we should do our basic intro stuff. We hope you like this podcast. If you do like the podcast, please tell everyone you know how amazing the podcast is and how that they should listen to it too. You can do that online. You can do that verbally. You can call people up and just tell them. You can slip them a note. Whatever works. And also, please, on whatever podcasting platform you like to use, if you could please rate the podcast. That helps other people find us who are just, let's say they're on iTunes or on Stitcher. They're looking for some wildlife or nature podcast that has something to do with cities. That's how you can help people find us. You can also tweet at us at UrbWildlifeCast. You can send us an email at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook. All great ways to connect. And you can also contribute to the podcast. We're always open to ideas for longer form stuff, but also if you just happen to see something in the city where you live, and this can be something that you think is really neat and special, or it can be something that's totally mundane that'll be neat and special to someone in a different city. Like the black kites, we're going to hear about a little bit snatching, or black kites eating termites, merging winged termites. That's something that might be something that you see routinely, or even just black kites flying around eating trash. These are things that might be common where you are, but on this continent we don't have kites, so it's pretty neat stuff.
On the way home from work today, I saw a small group of beautios, probably 3 or 4, flying together. I assume they're broadwing hawks. I was on the bus, so I had to look through wavy bus glass, and we changed lanes, so I lost my view of them. But I assume it's broadwing hawks because they're the hawk that migrates in groups.
Yeah.
Sometimes they can be in groups of thousands, but they tend to migrate in groups. And it was over the river, but also the highways next to the river. And from what I understand, and this is an urban wildlife interaction or phenomenon, is that hawks are starting to migrate via highways because of the thermals that come off of the macadam. So that would be really interesting.
Macadam is actually, funny enough, is a local, people use that term in Philadelphia more than other places. I'd say blacktop also.
Yeah, asphalt blacktop.
Yeah.
I thought maybe it was
Has there been
the proper term or something.
No, it's an aside.
Is this anecdotal evidence for this, or is there?
That's what I would like to look into.
Has somebody studied this more in depth?
I know that the folks at the Hawk Watch in Militia Hill, in Fort Washington State Park. So it started there because there was a phenomenon of maybe the first the Piedmont's more or less the foothills of the Appalachians,
right?
And I guess one of the first really defined ridges. It's not quite. It's not like an Appalachian ridge, but one of the first small ridge, is there, and they know the hawks migrate down there. But they said they also observed. It seemed like they was been observing the hawks, flying over the highway as well up there, and regularly enough. But who knows? I mean, if that's, that could just be someone got it in their head that they're over the highway and they keep looking at it. But
but I bet you get enough radio tracking devices on enough hawks, you could start seeing that pattern if it's there. So if you see that, record it and give us some
wildlife bling.
The theme I sort of was building this episode around was parakeets, although some of the topics will stray a little bit. Let's start by, what is a parakeet? So when we say parakeet versus parrot, and there are parrots, there are parrotlets, there are parakeets of different sizes.
Parakeets, well,
it pretty much describes smaller. Parakeets tend to refer to ones that have long. They're small and with a long tail.
Yeah. Well, there's certain genera too that are considered parakeets.
Yeah.
Psittacula, I think Aratinga.
Aratinga, yeah.
In which is New World genus. Psittacula. Psittacula is the genus of the rose-ringed parakeet.
Yep, we'll talk a lot about those in a second.
And the Alexandrian parakeet.
Okay.
So it's really kind of, I don't know off the top of my head whether or not the birds that we call parakeets with English in the English vernacular, whether they constitute a single clade.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not, and they might not be the
Evolutionary
closest. Well, it could be like eagles, where basically proportionally longer winged raptors are called eagles, and a bald eagle is not at all close related to a golden eagle. And in fact, smaller hawks and kites are each other's closest relative. So it could be that just anything small with a long tail, they call it.
So there's probably more than one paraphyletic genus that is considered a parakeet.
So basically smallish parrots.
But all parrots share certain attributes that make them really extraordinary among birds, in that they learn their vocalizations and they have complex social systems, and they have bright iridescent green and bluish plumage that reflects in the ultraviolet. And these are all things that are going to be affected by urbanization. And parrots there's a whole lot of parrots around the world that are populating cities in these semi-feral colonies. Although they're lovable. People love them because they're parrots and they're extraordinarily smart. But
you have field experience with parrots.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time watching parrots in the wild, and I studied. But actually, the species that back in 2007 I worked with an excellent scientist, Carl Berg, who studied at Cornell and did his dissertation there on vocal communication in Forpus paserinus, which is the green-rumped parrotlet. And these are also small parrots. Parakeets.
But they have a short tail.
We think of parakeets as small parrots. These are even smaller. These are like sparrow-sized parrots that are sexually dimorphic. Males have sexual singles, blue shoulder patches that they can flash. And I helped Carl work. I was his assistant in 2007, and we documented learning in a wild parrot for the first time.
Okay.
So we've known for many centuries that parrots learn in captivity, but there hasn't been any experimental evidence of parrots learning in the wild until Carl's study that I was super lucky to be there to work and be his assistant on
Very
that.
neat. So I was my first introduction to parakeets in cities in 99 into 2000. I was living in Buenos Aires in Argentina, and back then I used to go running, and I would run through different neighborhoods. But I remember one neighborhood, Parque Lezama, where it's kind of like a green landscape park with various kinds of trees, including palm trees, and it's on sort of a hillside. I remember one of those palm trees had what to me was a huge colony, but I think not relative to what the species does, but a whole bunch of monk parakeets living in this palm tree, sort of their nests built into the dead fronds, around the top of the bottom of the top of the palm tree, and then I don't know how many years later, not that much later, I found myself in New York, in Brooklyn. Okay, old historic cemetery in Brooklyn.
I just want to interject briefly and say that parrots nest in cavities, and so they wouldn't have been building a nest up in a palm tree. Their nests would be in cavities, maybe in the trunk of the palm tree. Do the monk parakeets?
Yeah,
they do build nests. Okay, all the parrots that I've seen I've worked with have been cavity nesters.
I think they build it with mud and then they put holes into it.
Oh wow, that's fascinating. Okay, so there's a diversity of nest construction in parrots. Okay.
Then the monk parakeets was in the Greenpoint Cemetery in Brooklyn, and it's this old, I think probably late 1800s, what was probably then a rural cemetery in the outskirts of the city. It's the Greenwood Cemetery, but it has these sort of ornate stone gates. And then up in some of the sort of ornate spires and stuff of the gates, the monk parakeets have built their nests sort of packed in there.
Real quick, it literally, I was looking up monk parakeet, and it straight up says monk parakeet is the only parakeet that builds a stick nest.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
But they build stick nests, but they still have multiple holes. They basically build stick nests to make cavities in it. So it's really I've seen them in the bottom of jabiru nests where the jabber makes a big nest and they build them into the bottom of the jabberoo nest. I had a urban parakeet experience. Well, I have had many, but this one I think is the most notable. I was in my favorite city in the world, besides Philadelphia, Curitiba, and I was at there's like a little zoo, not quite a zoo, but a little kind of mini zoo in the middle of the city, like it's surrounded by like skyscrapers, right? And there was a parakeet in the zoo, not in captivity, just in a tree, a group of parakeets like, in one of the trees in the zoo. And I was trying to identify it, and it was driving me crazy. I couldn't not get a field mark on this bird, right? And one of the things you're supposed to do is not look at your field guide right away. You're supposed to like look at the bird as long as you can and note, like make a note of observation, write things down. And I'm like, it's just green. There's no markings. And I was like, I was like, how am I going to identify this thing? It's so goddamn plain. And then I look at my field guide, plain parakeet.
That was perfect.
I would like to add quick what connects that, what makes that interesting is that that species, they nest in cavities, and this study, that was long-term studies started by Steve Beisinger back in the 1980s, that has banded thousands of green-rumped parrotlets over the years, and it's still ongoing. And he set up a artificial population by putting PVC pipes along fence line in pasture land, and two different populations. And it turns out that this species is one of the most persecuted for the pet trade, and there are lots of green rump parrotlets in pet stores and in people's homes all over the place, and including our own city, I'm sure. And it's one of those species that, to my knowledge, hasn't been introduced as a feral, a feral population that is breeding on its own. Even in the wild, these species are amenable to nesting in an artificial box if you provide it for them.
Give them a tube, they'll nest in it. In Los Angeles, I'm looking at the website of the California Parrot Project. They do have rose-ringed parakeets, and that's the other species that we're actually talking to people about in this episode, or other genus, because we'll bring in the Alexandrian parakeets for a little extra bit. But I think I was looking up Tokyo wildlife, and I noticed discussions in Tokyo wildlife websites, literature, about their rose-ringed parakeet populations. And we'll actually link to like a photo essay about them. That was kind of neat. And that got me looking into the species, rose-ringed parakeets. We noticed that they also have a huge population in London. From there, I was looking up, and they have populations in like all over the UK, like up to Scotland, to Glasgow. They live in the Netherlands. And so I was kind of curious, like, we're going to hear about sort of them and their introduced spot in a little bit. But I was also looking for someone to talk to about what they're like in their native range in South Asia. It's bigger than South Asia, yeah. But
so the rose-ringed parakeet, Satacula crameri, it extends from, there's an Indian population and subcontinental group, but then it also extends across Central Africa.
I eventually found this birder in Bangalore, which turned out to be a birding father and son team, and so we're going to listen to Krishna Girish and his father talk a little bit about rose-ringed parakeets in their backyard, as well as some of the other bird life of their home city, Bangalore.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing good. I'm here with my son Krishna.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do the podcast. I really think your story is cool. I like that you bird together. I started birding with my father when I was 9, so I feel, I like to see the same thing. And we still bird together 30 years later. We're still going.
Okay.
So why don't you introduce yourselves to our listeners?
Okay, so my name is Krishna Girish. I am 15 years old and I live in Bangalore, which is in South India. And I've been birding since the age of 7 or 8. And I maintain a blog called Off-Road Birder. It's at offroadbirder.blogspot.com and kind of talks about all the birding adventures that I have in and around India.
It's interesting. So I wasn't much into birding, and we went on a Audubon Society trip in Cupertino, where we used to live earlier. And we went birding, and all I knew about birds was, hey, there's a white bird, there's a red bird, there's a blue bird. But Krishna was really interested in birds. So now at least I can identify a few birds by sight. I'm not as bad as, hey, there's a big bird flying over there. So Krishna got the whole family interested in birding nowadays. So we spend almost all our vacations traveling to birding sites around India right now. So it's been a great experience going birding with him.
So tell me about Bangalore and how much do you bird inside the city versus going out to the countryside?
Actually, in the layout in which we live, we have a lake about 1 or 2 roads just behind our house. So whenever it's possible, we just head there in the evening, do some bird watching.
And that lake is right in the city, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's a
what?
it's a couple of blocks behind the house actually. So it's part of the city, and it's a part of a network of lakes which are part of the city. So the city had a few hundreds of lakes maybe around 50 years ago. Many have disappeared, but we still have a few lakes which are still a hotspot for a lot of birds.
And tell me, what kind of birds do you see there?
So you have 3 kinds of cormorants, of which you generally find the great cormorants over here. And you have a lot of egrets actually. And there's another bird called the red-wattled lapwing, which has a nest there. There are 2 families actually over there. I haven't seen the nest, but I know they're there.
Very cool.
So we have a pretty densely treed backyard, a lot of trees in our backyard. So we see a lot of flower peckers, sunbirds coming early in the morning. So it's a huge chatter in our backyard early morning with these sunbirds and flower peckers coming to drink honey and make sending the message that they're awake. So a lot of birds. And I think what we started with was the rose-winged parakeets. So you want to talk?
Yes, that's something very interesting to us. Yeah.
So when we first started our garden, one of the first trees we planted was the peacock flower. Over here we call it the Rajamalli. So after a while, when the tree started fruiting and stuff, we actually saw in the morning that rose-winged parakeets used to come in and eat the seeds. So we kind of did a bit of research about it. We found that the green seeds that are the immature ones that haven't grown fully are edible. But as soon as the seeds become brown, they become toxic, and so you can't eat them. So somehow the parakeets knew this, so they were only touching the green seeds. And what it would do is it would sit on a branch, it would pluck off a single one and then go sit on our garden wall. And it would hold the seed in one hand, one claw, and neatly pluck off the part of the hard covering, and it'll eat up all the seeds inside. It's actually a really, really neat cut, like straight, and it's a great thing to just to see.
That is, I love that bird. I've seen them in Thailand before.
Oh.
Yeah.
So that they are, they seem to do well in cities because I think they're living in cities like throughout Europe and now too, and even like become an invasive species some places.
Absolutely. So there's there's one more lake near our house, which is maybe a half mile away, and there's an island in the middle of a lake. So early morning, there are like hundreds of parakeets over there. It's a huge chatter. And many farmers who are outside Bangalore, the areas outside Bangalore, there's still a lot of farms out there. It's a huge pest for them because they come in huge flocks and eat a lot of these crops. So many of them either have catapults or guns to chase these birds away.
And actually, the parakeet, it has a very important role in folklore and mythology. So what local astrologers do is they have this bird. They'll snip off its wings that it can't fly, and they'll teach it to pick out a card from a bunch that kind of a sort of fortune telling. It's like tarot cards.
Oh, wow, that's kind of sad, but pretty interesting as well. So it's culturally, the bird has a big cultural significance as well.
Absolutely. So if you look at traditional Indian art, this is a symbol of spring. The parakeet is a symbol of spring arriving here.
Tell me, so how big is Bangalore?
Bangalore
How many
is,
people?
people-wise, is probably one of the biggest cities in India. It's around 8 million people. And that's a huge pressure on the urban wildlife also. And it's interesting that, a lot of wildlife is adapted. So, for example, black kites and Brahmini kites, they used to be hunters, and now they've adapted and become scavengers here. So, if you see, look, a lot of the landfills around Bangalore where garbage is being dumped, you see a huge flock of black kites typically over there.
So they just feed on all the urban waste that comes to them. And Brahmini kites, they generally live near lakes, and although they still do catch fish, they also rely on human means to get their food. And
Yeah, they are. For our listeners, Brahmini kites look like a mini bald eagle.
So that was fun.
Monitors are wonderful folks. I want to come hang out with them in Bangalore.
And they ended up talking about a bird that comes up whenever when Tony gets talking about urban bird life from Asia and Africa. You always work in the kites.
Yeah, the Milvus kites, because there's also the yellow-billed kite, I believe, in which might just be a subspecies of black kite, but there's a yellow-billed kite, and you can find it in trash dumps in
And Matt
Nairobi.
brought a couple Indian bird guides, so he's flipping through them right now.
And I think in Australia I've seen Milvus kites, and I've seen kites, and also like the Brahmini kite he talks about. I've seen them in Brisbane, Australia, flying around. So they're seems like a lot of the in the Australasian tropics. Well, in the Afrotropics, all the way to the Australasian tropics.
Through the whole old world tropics.
It seems like the old world tropic. It seems like kites kind of take the role of gulls and crows in big cities.
Oh, and the Brahmini kite is in a different genus,
Okay,
Haliastura.
there we go. So we have a couple genera here.
Yeah.
I had a hard time getting someone to talk to in Tokyo. I did end up talking to a naturalist who will work in later, but more about some other topics once we talk about raccoons and raccoon dogs episode. But I did find a great interviewee in London to talk. We're going to link to some articles or tweet out some articles for background. But this was some observations of how the exotic rose-ringed parakeets are working into we'll call it the local food webs of London.
I'm Rafe Hancock, and I watch the birds in Hyde Park and Kensington Gardens, and I write a blog about them. It's called Kensington Gardens and Hyde Park Birds.
I'm never quite sure what I should be calling them. Rose-ringed parakeets or ring-necked parakeets that you see in the Kensington Gardens and in Hyde Park.
Yeah, they are rose-ringed parakeets, but it's a subspecies of ring-necked parakeets. The ring-necked parakeet group is Psittacula krameri, and this one is Psittacula krameri manilensis, and it's a South Indian species, which is rather odd because it's putting up with the British climate. But this particular subspecies has been kept as a pet for at least more than 2,000 years. Anyway, there's a relief at Pergamon in Asia Minor, which was a Greek city at the time, from the 2nd century BC, which shows a rose-ringed parakeet. And I'm sorry, it's a mosaic, not a relief. There's a mosaic at Pergamon in Asia Minor from the 2nd century BC showing a rose-ringed parakeet, absolutely recognizable. And it's clear that it was being kept as a pet, and it must have been brought in along the Silk Road. So they've been here for a very long time. And they've been kept as pet birds in this country for really a very long time too. I mean, at any rate, for several centuries. And they must have escaped from aviaries before now, but being South Indian birds, they aren't very hardy, and they've probably didn't survive. But at some point, fairly recently, probably in the last 30 years, some of them that got out seem to have evolved into a super race of parakeets that can put up with the English winter. And as a result of that, they've spread very fast. They started off as a small colony in Kensington Gardens, just in one place. they seem to spread quite slowly. Although they breed up quite fast, they don't actually invade territory at very high speed. Sometimes the front of the parakeets only advances by a few hundred yards a year, I think. And so there was this a little group of them in Kensington Gardens, and they've only in the past 2 years have there been substantial numbers of them in Hyde Park, which is immediately adjacent, which shows how local they are. And they tend to cluster near the statue of Peter Pan, and people come and feed them there, which of course encourages the parakeets to hang out there. I think the total number in the park is about 80. But if you go to South London, Kingston, for example, which is just south of the Thames, you might see 20,000 of them. This is why people are getting rather upset about them.
I could see why.
They nest in tree holes, and they seem to use tree holes as shelter in the winter. And they feed on fruit when fruit's in season. They eat leaf buds and flower buds, too. And they get through the winter somehow. I'm not absolutely sure what they eat then. There are probably some berries left on some of the trees, and they certainly eat berries. The first bird we saw eating a parakeet was a tawny owl. Tawny owls normally live on mice and small rodents, and this one had caught a parakeet and was feeding it to its owlets. Obviously, with 4 owlets to look after, there was a need for more food, and it had caught this parakeet. And we were mystified as to how owls catch parakeets. Owls are rather slow flyers, and parakeets are very, very fast flyers, although they travel in straight lines. And later, a friend of mine saw an owl trying to catch a parakeet, and the way that it did it was to sit in the top of a tree and look at a lower tree where parakeets tended to congregate. And the lower tree had some bare branches, leafless branches at the top, and the parakeets were sitting on these. And the owl glided over silently, because owls can fly completely silently, and tried to pick parakeet off one of the branches. It missed, but that's obviously the way they do it.
When was that? What time of day was that?
It was in broad daylight.
Huh, okay.
Yes, owls normally hunt at night, especially at dawn and dusk. But with owlets, they have to hunt in daylight because the owlets get hungry and start making a fuss. Well, we saw a hobby eating a parakeet. Hobbies are small migratory falcons, and they come to the park in summer, just a couple of them usually. And that really only just larger than parakeets, and it was rather a surprise to see this hobby. Again, it was a hobby which had young. It had 2 young, and so it was having to catch extra things for them. Normally hobbies eat small birds. They can catch swifts and dragonflies. But this time, anyway, we saw a young hobby eating half a parakeet. Presumably the other one had got the other half. And it's not difficult for a hobby to catch a parakeet because they're very swift birds, very swift and agile. Parakeets are very swift but not particularly agile. They tend to fly in dead straight lines, and so all the hobby has to do is to fly after it and drop on it. But actually killing a bird almost the same size is another matter. And quite a lot of people around here have seen parakeets being eaten by peregrines, but that's not a surprise at all, except to wonder why peregrines would bother with them when there are plenty of urban pigeons, which are much bigger and meatier.
I thought I saw something also about sparrowhawks.
Yes, sparrowhawks will have a go at almost anything, and a female sparrowhawk, which is larger than the male, can kill a pigeon. So sparrowhawks can certainly eat parakeets. I've never seen a sparrowhawk eating a parakeet myself, but it has been seen.
I'm kind of curious, like, what do you think about these parakeets?
The parakeets in the park are certainly not interfering with the other birds to any great degree. They do steal their nest hole, but it's a big park full of old trees full of holes, and there are plenty of holes for all. Otherwise, I don't think they molest the birds at all.
Okay.
Obviously, when there are 20,000 of them in Kingston, people get rather disturbed by the noise, but I'm always very reluctant to describe a bird as a pest, considering that I'm a member of the number 1 pest species on Earth.
Exotic, invasive.
You know, this is something that Tony, you've talked about in the context of your Miami birding trip, of where you might have, what were they, turtle doves?
Eurasian collar doves.
Eurasian collar doves that are spreading, but apparently make fine food for the local Cooper's hawks and other.
Cooper's hawks eat a lot of them, and apparently short-tailed hawks, which are a buteo that specializes in birds, which is unusual for buteos. They tend to eat mammals.
Buteo is a genus of hawks, like red-tailed hawks and buzzard.
Common buzzard.
Yep.
So they tend to take things off the ground, like small mammals. But this is a buteo that actually specializes in taking birds from the forest canopy.
Okay.
And they're very common in the tropics. So, but they have a small toehold in the Americas and
talonhold.
Talonhold, indeed. in southern Florida. Well, actually, central and southern Florida. But they looked like they were declining and in some trouble, and they're endangered, I believe. But it seems like they're really like eating Eurasian collar doves and have kind of starting to shift their breeding to urban areas because of the the numbers of
reliable food source.
Yeah, and it's a novel ecosystem where like they're probably really competing with other invasive species, or I mean, if it's even called invasive at this point. They're not like they're out in the. They're not even really in agricultural areas. They're mostly just in urban, suburban areas, and not even in like. They're certainly not competing with mourning doves in like natural, more natural conditions. So
yeah, I mean, this idea that they might not be that harmful to anything, it kind of makes me wish we had parakeets.
Yeah,
why can't we?
I'm surprised we don't have monk parakeets.
I know.
We used to.
Yeah, we used to have the Carolina parakeet.
Oh, I saw some other another feral parakeet population in Cairo, Egypt. I don't have that much to report, honestly. I saw a number of the birds along the Nile River, and I think they were sulfur-winged parakeets. I'm not sure that's just the English name that I'm remembering. You might want to look that up on Google.
Yeah, I'll cut it out if you're wrong.
Yeah, but it was cool. It was interesting to. I was exploring Cairo and going around, around the pyramids, and I went to the Egyptian Museum, and I was in and around Tahrir Square where the Egyptian Revolution just happened, and that's where I was staying right there. And there were parakeets that flew through the square, and I walked down. I went to the pyramids the one day and walked down along the banks of the Nile and saw a bunch of them up in the trees, and it was a very cool experience.
And I mean, in the tropics. I mean, in the neotropics, there's parakeets. There's parakeets and parrots in any city park. But
I saw chestnut-fronted macaws in Caracas, Venezuela.
We talked about the ones in my trip to Miami. There was a yellow chevron, wasn't right-winged yellow chevron. They're both there. One's when you count, when you can't. And then, of course, in California, famously in San Francisco, the parakeets of Telegraph Hill. And which I love that movie, especially for the ending, because they're
Will we get married?
Yeah. Well, the filmmaker, she's following this very charming, endearing guy who's just in love with these parakeets. They call them conures, but they're parakeets. That conures only in the pet trade. That term's only used in the pet trade.
Well, actually, Coneuropus is the genus.
Right, but
it's a genus of parakeets.
Well, they call things that are in Aratinga conures too.
Okay.
Right. So anyway, he's in love with these parakeets, and he's really super into them, and he's kind of socially awkward but in an endearing way. And they talk about the different ones because you tell them apart by individuals, and then at the end they're like in these two parakeets paired up, and then like the filmmaker, I forget her name, but she's like, and we became a pair. Her and the subject of apparently in the filming of it, they got together romantically, and I thought that was like adorable. Yeah,
I agree. I was looking also at other cities in addition to Bangalore. I was looking at I looked up Dhaka in Bangladesh. Initially, I was looking at some stuff like a university survey, just that showed that there are rose-ringed parakeets living in this university campus. But then, when I was just Googling like parakeets in Dhaka, I found the Bangladesh Alexandrine Parakeet Conservation Project. I thought, okay, this is interesting. What the hell's an Alexandrine parakeet? But it is the largest member of
Cetacula.
the genus that includes the rose-ringed parakeets also.
Spectacular.
Spectacular. Exactly. And there's this this biologist, really, I call him naturalist. He's a trained guy in Dhaka, Sourav Mahmood, who we included on an early episode talking about starlings / mynas, shaliks in Bangladesh. But I also talked to him about his work trying to start up a project to conserve Alexandrine parakeets in Dhaka.
My full name is MD Sharif Hossain Sourav. I am doing job with Center for Environmental and Geographic Information Service. Here I am role-playing as an ecologist and doing almost the biodiversity related research and study. Okay. And also I am writing to the newspaper, basically the leading newspaper of Bangladesh, Daily Star and Prothom Alo, regarding the wildlife and nature conservation. And as well as I am doing photography, basically the nature photography, and I am doing some conservation related work, doing my own.
Tell me, what first drew my attention to you is the work you're doing on your own with the Alexandrine parakeets.
Yeah.
Could you please start off by telling me what is an Alexandrine parakeet?
It is a parrot, or it belongs from parrots family, Yeah. And in Bangladesh we have 7 species of parakeets and parrots, and Alexandrine parakeet is the largest parakeet in Bangladesh, and among of the 7 species, this species is critically endangered based on IUCN Bangladesh.
Okay, and what does it look like?
It looks like grass green, and the male and female differ between the male and female both have maroon patch in wings, both wings, and female have no ringed in neck, but adult male have prominent maroon ring surrounding the neck.
Okay. So prominent maroon ring around the neck. Neat. Why would a parakeet want to live in the center of the city?
In Dhaka city, once upon a time, like the 19th century, a lot of reptiles and a lot of mammals as well as the tiger and so many bird species. Because in 20th century, a lot of trees and wild bush and shrubs all over the Dhaka city. Now the population of Dhaka city around 17 million. So 400 or 300 years back, not so much population, and the environment was too good for the wildlife. And the Alexandrine parakeet like the drier part, geographically drier part. But out of Dhaka, we have 3 location. It's all the North Bengal part, and the population is not too much. It's very little, around 5 or 6 or not more than 10. The record of Alexandrine parakeet from the North Bengal. But in 2014, I just have seen some sounds and started to monitoring and checking, and suddenly I found a flocks. It's about 13 flying over the top building of Dhaka city, and after that I started searching what they do in Dhaka city.
Okay, thank you. And where do they nest in Dhaka city?
Yeah, they nest in a building cavities.
Okay. And so one thing I forgot to ask you about them. Why are they endangered?
Parakeet is a game bird. Like the people of many countries would like to pet the parakeets, and Bangladesh is not dissimilar with this other country, like the animal pet. And parakeet is very much cordial with the human being. They can talk, and the poachers and some traders always try to catch some wild birds for sale. And another thing is the habitat, the large tree, and also the lack of food item, basically the fruiting tree, basically due to the hunting and also for the trading.
Okay.
And also for the pet, the parakeet became rare in Bangladesh.
Okay, and so tell me about once you found the parakeets living in Dhaka City. What did you start? What did you do? What is the project?
The project is about the observing the feeding, roosting, and breeding behavior, as well as the population, and also their activities like roosting, and also the behavior regarding the fledging, like that incubation, brooding.
Okay, and did you put up any nest boxes?
Yeah, I have put 10 nest boxes. It's for testing. First time I set up 10 nest boxes for testing. How's they like or not like. But first year they like it and try to make nest there. But some other species like starling and other cavities birds try to chase them. And the parakeet became not successful first year. I think this year, they will again. But I am thinking to set up the wooden box.
Okay, what did you use the first time?
I used the pipe, PVC pipe.
I thought there were so many inspiring things in Sorov's work. First, you've got it's locally endangered, but endangered parakeet or species that turns out to have found its own way into urban habitat. That finds that the cavities in old buildings, just like you have starlings here. The cavities in old buildings serve as great tree hole analogs. And
same with kestrels.
Same with kestrels.
Other cool natives too.
Yep. And then that the guy gets, just sort of, we look around the table. We have friends who do this kind of thing. We'll be like, then start researching this animal that he turns up in the city, and then next thing you know, he's he's building nest boxes, and I've got a picture on Facebook. He's also on Twitter, but on Facebook he got some pictures of his project with with Swarov standing next to stacks of wooden nest boxes he's going to put up, which is just so cool. It's like the kind of thing that maybe he's a professional ecologist. I'm sure he got the right permits and everything. But I wonder how hard it would be in Philadelphia to try to launch a nesting project for an endangered bird species, even if it was in the city.
One thing that he has going for him is that this Alexandrine parrot is big and charismatic. And if any species you can drum up public support to save it, that seems like
it's got to be that. Yeah.
Named after Alexander the Great because he exported them.
And this is something. Joey make an important point there about them being exported by Alexander the Great, and seeing this genus showing up on mosaics, like Rafe was talking about. We'll link to some pictures and articles about those mosaics where you're looking at these mosaics made by there's one that was excavated by excavated in London, first century Roman mosaic in London that includes what I think were the rose ring, but still the same genus of parakeet. So that's a few hundred years after Alexander, but a group of parakeets that even in the ancient world were being traded around the continent into far distant places.
Yeah, I think it's crazy. His influence to this day. You hear there's a parakeet named after him because he apparently liked it and exported it.
Yeah,
and then Kandahar, Afghanistan, Alexander. He found it at Kandahar.
Oh, that was one of his Alexandrias?
Yeah, that was one of his Alexandrias. Yeah, it's crazy.
I hadn't thought about that.
I hear stories about people that. So this is kind of a side, but like let's, for the sake of being like Joe Rogan-esque and like and broing down. Apparently, back in the day,
let's bro down.
People used to like Roman emperors or like powerful people. When Alexandria was still like a place you could visit and see Alexander's grave, they would go there and reflect on like what Alexander the Great had done at his age, you know, and how insignificant their lives are compared to him. And I'm thinking who should that be for us? Like what like naturalist should we go to? Should we think about like Jane Goodall when she was like in Gombe like in like her early 20s and to be like, I'll never accomplish what she did in my life, but she was 25, you know, like is that what we like what would be our equivalent be?
Man,
you know?
You got me thinking. I mean, he didn't write about it quite yet, but Darwin was like making his great observations when he was young on the Beagle, you know.
Well, Roger Peterson was pretty young when he made the Peterson Guide.
Yeah, Peterson is the one I'm thinking about because I've seen pictures of the guy. I'm like, wait, A, he's still alive, and B, like,
no, he's not anymore.
Oh, he's not.
You think it's Sibley?
Sibley, I'm sorry, I'm thinking Sibley.
Yeah.
So Sibley is how old now?
He's probably only in his 50s, maybe 60.
So Sibley's like 50s or 60s, and the book came out
in the 90s.
So
he was in his 30s.
He was in his 30s. He's again younger than we are now. Well, not you, but Tony and I are older than he was when he brought out what many regard as the best birding guide for.
Well, I'm 34. So
okay, what are you doing?
What am I doing?
Matt doesn't have to worry about that. He's
I'm
very
working
prolific.
on some good ornithology.
Yes, he is.
He also put out a few records.
Not least of all,
I haven't conquered any countries.
Wait, not least of all, synanthropic organism.
Yeah, of course. Matt is part of our. I mean, I can't believe we didn't mention. I can't believe we didn't mention that like the first thing. Excuse me for being remiss. My apologies to you, Matt, and to our listeners who are deprived of knowing even sooner. Although we have mentioned him obviously before, but yeah, this is the guy who does who plays the keys on synanthropic organism and a few of the other.
He sings with you on it also.
Yeah, I mean Matt's a real musician.
Organism.
Yeah, yeah, he does the. It's the thought of Matt backing me up is absurd because he actually can sing. But yes, Matt was backing me up on that song, which is hilarious. And Matt and I, we're gonna keep it low for now, but we may have a music project coming up.
We finally got our Parakeet episode in. Thanks to Matt for joining us.
Sure thing. Great to be here.
Thanks to our interviewees, Saurav, Rafe, and of course Krishna. So if you got some observations of your local parakeets, whether they be native or exotic, please.
Or maybe it's ambiguous.
Or ambiguous.
Spectacular, spectacular.
Dude, Matt, I'm gonna dedicate my life to describing one of those spectacular species, to just name it that.
So with that, if you see any special, anything special, parakeets or otherwise, record a little voice note on your phone and pop it over to us. We'll put it at the end of the episode for some
wildlife bling. How long until that's like till that song is like no longer like in the public mindset?
At least 5 years.
Okay,
we're good.
Might be too late to make the video though. Of me dancing around like the boardwalk at John Hyde National Wildlife Refuge in a big sweater.
It'll be full of waterfowl for like the entire winter.
Yeah.
It'll be cold. It'll be perfect.
It's true.
All right. So we can make it happen. Yeah, and you could also write us an email at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. You can tweet at us at urbwildlifecast. And you can find us on Facebook. We are going to be tweeting and linking to and posting so much stuff out of this episode. There's like a wealth of resources on all these things. Articles about the rose-ring parakeets in Tokyo as well as in London. We got blogs to touch on.
I would also like to post a video of how a parrot learns its name.
And
from
we can
the Cornell Lab of Ornithology from our study in Venezuela.
We got that to post. We got local parrot groups we're going to link to, from the California Parrot Project to some folks in Caracas. We hope we're doing well. Kind of turbulent times in Caracas these days. With that, we'll wrap up.
Hey, podcast listeners. Tony's conversation with Krishna, Girish, and his dad covered a lot more urban birding territory than just parakeets, so we decided to include some of that at the end of this episode as bonus material. We'll pick up their conversation where they left off, talking about Brahmani kites in Bangalore. Hope you enjoy.
Like, so,
Yeah.
like they have a white tail, white head. Yeah, so for our listeners who don't know what these birds look like, the other saying the Brahmani kite actually looks like a quarter-sized bald eagle. The same markings, like our national bird in America.
Right.
So, yeah.
And
So please continue.
So this bird actually, it's one of it kind of shows that how birds have actually adapted to urban environments. So it has a tendency to nest on stuff like mobile towers. So actually, a few days ago, as we were driving somewhere, we actually saw a black kite carrying a twig, and it was dropping in a nest it built on the top of a telephone tower.
Oh, wow.
So instead of building a nest on, say, a cliff or something, it's kind of adapted to modern life.
Wow. Do you have is there a birding community that you spend time with, or is it just like the two of you going out?
There is the BNG Birds, which is kind of like a group for Bangalore's birds. And it's like a Yahoo group in which they discuss a lot of sightings and essentially plans to meet up. But we're kind of out of the way from the places where they generally go, so we're kind of independent that way.
yeah, so there's a huge group, which means almost every Sunday they go to the typical birding hotspots within the city. So there's a place called Lal Bagh, which is something like a scaled down version of Central Park in New York. It's a probably 200-year-old park. So there's a lot of mature trees over there. So you see a lot of birds which you normally don't see in urban populations over there, urban cities over there. There's also a few large lakes. So a lot of birds which come in, the winter to India go to these lakes. For example, if you go a little outside Bangalore, there are these bar-headed geese which migrate across the Himalayas from China to come and nest here during the winter season.
And someone in an airplane actually recorded that this bar-headed goose was flying over Mount Everest. So,
Wow, yeah. Just to think that there's a bird that, breeds in the Tibetan plateau in the middle of wilderness, and then spends after flying over Mount Everest, is spending its winter in a lake in Bangalore, India. It's amazing.
Right.
It just connects the urban landscape to wilderness. Nothing else does that like birds. And that's one of the reasons I love them, and I'm sure it's one of the reasons you love them too.
yeah.
So one more bird which I was really surprised to see. I've never seen it in my childhood when I grew up in a different city. But it's a shikra, which is a small hawk.
Oh yeah.
So it's amazing. It's an amazing sight. It's a small raptor. So to see it swooping and catching squirrels and rats, it's a pretty amazing sight. So we see it very often, and the call kiki it's a very distinctive call.
And we have one resident in front of our house. So if you go in the morning, you might just see it sitting on the tree just across the road or somewhere like really nearby.
You want to talk about those termites? That's a really interesting thing. So we have a lot of, it used to be farmland over here. So a lot of termites in the soil. And what happens typically is after it rains, especially heavy rains, 2 days after that, these termite eggs hatch and a lot of them emerge out of the soil. So they come out as small flying insects. Some of them become queens, some become workers, but they all come out of the small hole in the ground. And typically it happens around 5:45, 6 in the evening, just before sunset, invariably. So once this termites start emerging, you see a lot of birds approaching over there.
So you have you have black kites coming there, you have the shikra coming there, you have a lot of crows,
Miners.
you have miners, and
even dogs, stray dogs.
And once actually we saw an owl over there. They came out a little late that night, so it was dark by the time, and an owl was feasting on it, an owlet, but.
Oh wow.
So the funny part is each of these birds have different styles of catching the insects. So the shikra catches everything on the wing. Whatever's in the air and didn't got past the other ones on the ground, it directly catches those. The black kite, it catches the termites in its legs and then transfers it to its mouth while on the wing. And the crows and the miners are generally sitting on the ground, and the owl was also sitting on the ground that day when we saw it.
Wow, that's really cool. And what species of owl was it?
That was a spotted owlet that day, actually. So we have this lamppost. Whenever it comes, it sits on the same lamppost. And that day there were ants, so it actually came down for that.
Wow. You know it's so cool, because the shikra is very closely related to the Cooper's hawk, right? Which they're both accipiters. And the Cooper's hawk in the United States and Canada lives right in cities, right? Like I see them in the park all the time. They eat pigeons. And the spotted owlet is very closely related to the burrowing owl. And in Florida and in the West, burrowing owls will live in city parks and everything. So it's amazing that these two birds in two completely different parts of the world, I mean, these four birds that are, that are closely related, both hawks are closely related, both owls are closely related, and they both have taken to living in the city, in two different parts of the world. I think that's just amazing. So, it's cool when that happens. When, I guess there's something, something about the similarities that they have as being closely related both lend themselves to being able to live in cities. And that's really, that's cool. I love that you talk about you mentioned Central Park, and then you're talking about the termites. So in Central Park, they notice a phenomenon where the birds go after when the flying ants that are start moving. That's where they go look at the warblers. And here you are talking about in Bangalore when the termites start flying all the birds. So that's really cool. I love these parallels between American cities and cities in India. That's really cool.
So,
but we don't have termites here, though. I mean, our termites live in wood, not in soil.
Yeah. So actually, they start in the soil here and then come into the houses. So I'm not sure. You've seen sparrows, Tony, because that's something interesting here. Because sparrows have virtually disappeared from Bangalore, but the only place you can see them here in Bangalore is in the airport. So the airport is a huge food court, and and the food court it's lit up. It's an airport, so it's always lit up. So there are maybe 24 sparrows over there.
Yeah, and what happens is they're constantly feeding over there, raising a family. And actually, what happens is I think once when I was eating something, it actually came onto my plate and bit off a chunk and flew off. So I think that's one way they've adapted. And my dad went to US a while ago, and over there he noticed that they're in the airports of JFK and Boston as well, actually. So it looks like they have a tendency to gravitate towards airports.
Yeah, well, we have you talk about house sparrows. Yeah, they're everywhere in American cities. They're on every street in every American city. They're unbelievably common, and they were brought here to clean up after horse waste.
Okay.
And so I don't know how effective they were. They're alternate. And they call them house sparrows. They also call them horse sparrows because they were here to clean up, I guess, to eat the bugs and whatever that was in. Because when horses were everywhere, so I don't know if that worked out well. But now they're here to stay. So Krishna, do you plan to do birding as a career? Is this something you want to be, or is this going to just be your hobby?
I'm not entirely sure. It all depends on what I can do with it. For example, if I found a nice research too, for example, how urban development affects birds, like what we're discussing on now, maybe I might take it up, but I'm actually not sure about anything at this point.
But yeah, you got plenty of time. So do you have and have you gone overseas yet? Have you birded anywhere? So do you have any places that you dream of going birding internationally? Most people, a lot of birders dream about going to India, but since you live
already,
there,
so
yeah,
we used to live in the San Francisco Bay Area till around 5 years ago. So he started birding over there. So we've seen the west of US, but we haven't seen the rest of it.
Yeah. And I'm hoping at some point I can head for South America, which is the ultimate.
So he's already
Species
purchased the
collection.
books. He's already got the books of birds of Peru, birds of South Africa. I've already got the books for him. So he's just waiting for the trip.
At some point of time, I'll head there and have an adventure.
Is there anything other interesting sightings or things you think people want to know about urban wildlife that you can tell me about that come to mind?
So we have another bird here. It's called the drongo.
I wish we had the video because I can actually show you on my arm that I have a greater racket-tailed drongo tattoo.
Oh, okay, cool.
I can see a photo over here. I see a tattoo of a bird. I can't see what bird it is though.
So if it's on my arm, it's the greater racket-tailed drongo.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
No, so here greater racket-tailed drongo is further to our west in the more forested areas, but here we have the black drongo. And this is another bird that's really adapted to urban life, actually. So what happens is we have a lot of plots of land that people often buy so that they can build their house on it. And often those plots are completely covered in grass or weeds, if I may. And before construction, they just burn the entire thing up so they can clear the land. And the drongo takes complete advantage of this. So since it was plants, insects would be living in it. And insects have to escape that fire because otherwise they're going to get burned. So the insects that can fly, they go up into the air. And the drongo is just swooping around there ready to take advantage of the situation.
That is so cool. And that's like the really great example of human-wildlife interactions. That is really cool.
Yeah, so what happens is actually you have a lot of cow herding happening in the area. So we have this guy who comes with 4 cows to feed on the grass in the plot next to us, like once every 2 or 3 days. And you have another, I think you have it there too, the cattle egret. Actually, what it does, it's called the cattle egret because it likes to take advantage of cattle. So it'll sit on top of the cattle and pick off all the parasites. And also, when the cow is eating the grass, it takes advantage of the insects that are coming off. So it gets a meal too, and the cow gets clean. So it's a symbiotic relationship.
Very cool.
So a lot of cows here are typically owned by individuals. They typically have 2 cows. These are not huge farms. People have like 3 or 4 cows, and they typically bring it to these vacant plots of land with a lot of grass growing, so that the cows can feed that, and it's good for us because the grass gets cleared.
Nice. And the cattle eagles will be right with the cows, like right in the city.
Absolutely.
Is that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cattle eagles are an interesting story. They blew over, and I guess in a hurricane to South America in like the 40s or 50s, and then they colonized South America, and then they colonized the United States, and so they started nesting in like the 50s, and then
they
so
spread
came up,
over.
Yeah, but then now like they're getting rarer. They were like pretty common, and now like you have to really look for them,
Okay.
But so that's such an interesting bird. That how it's able to do that. But I had never seen them like right in the city like that. That's really cool.
And it's
that relationship.
It's interesting that we should go to rural outside Bangalore, whereas there are larger farms. Farmers use tractors to get the land ready. And now these egrets follow the tractors. They don't follow the cattle anymore. They find that the tractor.
The tractor churns up the insects, so they don't even need the cows in the first place.
So they follow the tractors all the way around.
Wow. So even though within a city of 8 million people, you still have like a fair amount of agricultural land inside Bangalore. Is that
it's a bit outside? Maybe you go 20 miles, 30 miles, you still see agricultural land outside Bangalore.
So there are some areas actually which are like heavily populated and full of buildings, but we're slightly outside that kind of area. Slightly, like it's still Bangalore, obviously, but it's not entirely populated. So there's still a lot of land that people use for like vacant and not taken over by apartments.
That's cool. And yeah, I love I love when you talk about the kites, because I saw that in Hong Kong where the black-eared kites would be flying around the city, and and because in the States we have gulls, like ring-billed gulls, herring gulls, laughing gulls, and we also have crows that will be feeding on garbage and trash, whatever. And then it seems like in Asia and the tropics, it's kites that you see, and I love that. So, do you know if the kites have actually increased their population because of cities? Have you heard anything about that?
I think definitely, actually, because I've noticed an interesting phenomenon. I think the kites have grown so large in number that they've started interbreeding with each other. So a few years ago, I saw a certain individual kite which had characteristics of both. So
wow, did you get a photo?
I don't really remember. I should actually check.
So he doesn't go around with the camera much. He just goes around with the binocs and his notebook. And I wasn't there.
Yeah. I'm the same way where I never took to taking photos, and every once in a while you see something, but do you want to carry around a big camera everywhere you go too,
Yeah. Actually, the biggest congregation of black kites is the meat market, which is in central Bangalore. So it's probably thousands of kites. There are photographs of, the whole, the market is right in the center of the city. It's right, actually, the place where the wholesale meat market takes place. And there are thousands of kites which come there typically when this meat is being packed up and distributed, because they dump all the leftovers for garbage clearance later. So these kites congregate typically around the same time when the market is in operation. So it's a huge adaptation for them. It's free food and it's easy to get also.
Yeah. So Krishna, do you have other birding friends your age, or is there much of an interest of folks your age, or are you pretty unusual?
I haven't really made any connections with anyone who's my age as of yet. But at some point of time, I plan to start a birding club in Bangalore. And I've given a lot of talks, actually. I've given 2 or 3 at the lake, and one at my school, actually, about the birds of Bangalore. And I'm planning to start a club, but nothing yet.
Yeah, I was the same way. I was birding when I was your age. I was birding by myself, but that was also before the internet, so it might have been easier to find people my age now. But then in the 80s, in the early 90s, it was pretty difficult before the internet.
Yeah.
So that's cool. That's really, man. I love talking to you guys because it reminds me so much of me and my dad.
Bangalore is a pretty interesting place. There are a lot of birds still left to see.
I think for me, it's been a revelation that there's so much, wildlife around you which you didn't notice until you're aware of it. Someone points it to you. It opens a new universe, because you think that it's just, traffic and cars and people, but there's much more behind all this stuff. There's a different ecosystem out there. And, once you keep watching out for it, it's a lot of fun. Just going in a car trip or a bus makes it much more interesting. You're looking out for wildlife. It's a different experience, and I've been really enjoying it.
Man, we're getting some great stuff. I really appreciate you guys doing this. I want you to tell our listeners what your blog is and how they can find it.
Okay, so for quite a while now, I've been maintaining a blog called Off-Road Birder. That's at offroadbirder.blogspot.com. It's owned by Blogger. And in that, all the adventures I've had at birding, whether it's at the lake or any interesting sightings or observations I've made, I put in the form of a blog post. So most recently, I have a trip to Masinagudi, which is in the Western Ghats. And before that, a trip to my grandpa's farm in Kerala, which is further to the west of here. And that's actually where we saw the tractor egrets. And anything further that happens with me in birding, whatever happens over here, should be updated over there. So check it out.